Hello everyone, yes, hello, good day, pip, cheerio. Yes, I just watched The Crown, season 6, part 2. Let's talk about it. So yeah, the time has come to talk about the final part of the final season of The Crown. And guys, what a bittersweet moment. I am so sad to see the series go. I've said before on my channel, I think The Crown is one of the best things to come out of Netflix.com. I think The Crown is one of the best things to come out of that goddamn streaming platform. So I am really sad to see it end with this second part of this 6th season. Now, I already discussed my thoughts on part 1 of season 6 a couple of weeks back, so you can check out that review on my channel if you haven't already. But that part of the series focused on Princess Diana and the final weeks leading up to her tragic and very highly publicized passing. This time around, we circle back to the Windsors, who have largely been living in her shadow in the last couple of seasons of the show. This time around, the focus is very much on Elizabeth and co, as we explore what happened to the royal family in the very late 90s to the early 2000s, leading up to 2005 with the wedding of Charles and Camilla. So there's a lot to unpack here, okay, especially because this is actually the first era that they explore on the show that I have vague memories of, because I was actually alive and I was actually living in the UK, so it's a different experience for me as a viewer. But many of you guys have told me that you remember some of the previous events as well, and you've had that experience in previous seasons. So I'd be interested to hear what you guys thought of how they handled the events that took place in the early 2000s, especially because I have a different take this time around. So we're going to dive into all of the good, the bad, and the meh of the final part of the final season of The Crown. If that sounds good to you, then keep watching. But before we do, as per usual, if you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to my channel and make sure you turn on your notifications so that you can be told when I upload next. Especially because in no more than 1 week, the Genie Awards of 2023 will be premiering on this channel. The most prestigious awards in all of awards season. Everyone will be there, so be sure to join in. And I will be chatting to you guys live as the video premieres, just as I did last year. So be sure to join in on the fun. More details to come during the week. But before we get into all of that fun stuff, let's dive into the final part of The Crown. So as I said, part 2 of season 6 focuses back on the Windsors, and we dive into, Charles and Camilla's relationship, especially post Diana's death. And we also get a look at William and Kate's relationship as Wills heads off to university at St. Andrews in Scotland, and that's where they met, and that's where they got to know each other, and that's where the fashion show, the infamous fashion show where Kate was revealing a lot of skin and it was very scandalous, took place. And as per usual in The Crown, we also had some exploration of the socio-political tensions that occurred during this era as well, especially highlighting the relationship that Elizabeth had with Tony Blair, the Prime Minister of the time, who was extremely popular coming out the gate, but that popularity fell abysmally as the years went on and he got involved in the Iraq War. Now, when it comes to different kinds of storylines that The Crown usually tackles, my favorites tend to be the ones that focus on the socio-political climate of the era where Queen Elizabeth was queen. I really like it when they, give us a snapshot of what was happening in that moment in history, beyond just Buckingham Palace or Windsor Castle or Balmoral, but, on the streets, in the UK and across the world. I really enjoy having that insight, even if it is from that royal perspective, because it feels like a different kind of, history documentary. It feels like a way of seeing the events in history that only The Crown can deliver, because it has that focal point of the royal family. So that's what I have always enjoyed when it comes to this series. And unfortunately, as these seasons have gone on, we've gotten less and less of that, because we of course had to, pay homage to and focus on the relationship between Princess Diana and Prince Charles. That was the hot topic for several decades that people were focused on, and that all led up to this cataclysmic ending with Princess Diana's horrific and tragic passing. And so of course the Crown had to kind of take a step back a little bit and focus on those events, because it was giving the people what they wanted, or at least they thought they were giving the people what they wanted. But for me personally, I've always enjoyed it when they took a look at a specific moment in history that may have been forgotten or underreported, and given us an insight into that moment or an insight into that scandal. For instance, the situation with the Duke of Windsor and his association with Nazis. Like, that's the sort of thing that I really appreciated the Crown for, is highlighting moments like that were forgotten and bringing them to light for a younger generation like myself. But unfortunately, that's kind of been overshadowed by the Charles Diana drama. And on the one hand, I understand, because like I said, you've got to give the people what they want. This was the hot topic that many of us were anticipating a few seasons back. And so when we saw it play out, it was, exciting. And we wanted to see how the Crown would handle it, especially considering how, top-notch and classy the previous seasons of the show were. But as we have gotten on in the seasons, especially with the benefit of hindsight, I do feel that we lost a little bit of the show, a little bit of what made the show special, at least to me, when we started focusing so much on that storyline. Now, sticking to the topic of how they handled the Charles Diana situation, I think many of us were more than just a little bit disappointed with season 5, which really delved into the breakdown of their marriage. Many people threw around the word melodramatic and kind of corny and cheesy, and I would agree with that for season 5 for sure. Even though, again, you had to show these events play out because this is what people expected from season 1 of the show, I think sometimes the way that they tackled it felt just a little bit, just not quite top notch, the kind of quality of writing and storytelling that we have come to expect from this elite series. But in my opinion, I think they had a return to form with the first part of season 6. I think they did justice to the final weeks of Princess Diana's life, exploring her relationship with Dodi and Mohammed Al Fayed, and how he perhaps tried to construct a reality that wasn't actually there in order to get his son to, bag this prize that would lead him to his own motivations. Again, I discussed this in my part 1 review, but I think they did a really good job of unpacking Diana's psyche during those moments and the intense pressures and suffocation she would have felt being constantly surrounded by paparazzi, surrounded by people who just wanted something out of her, wanted pieces of her everywhere she turned. That was so well delivered for the first part of this final season. So going into the second part, I was excited to see how they would deal with the rest, the aftermath of this horrific event. And unfortunately, I have to say, for the most part, and this is coming from someone who is a big fan of the show. Hello, I'm a big fan of the show, okay? But I just feel like all of a sudden, with all of that momentum that they finally got back with the first part of season 6, it just kind of came to a halt. It just kind of came to a halt, and it felt like they were just recycling the same old storylines, the same old lines, oftentimes, we'll talk about that in a second, that they've explored before. They were applying it to the younger generation, really highlighting William, for instance, which was interesting. But all in all, I just felt like we lost, again, that momentum that we got from the first part, where it felt like they were returning to form. But this time around, it wasn't even because of any melodrama, although, again, apart from the William storyline, which we'll talk about in a second, but it wasn't even because of any cheesiness or melodrama as it pertained to how they handled the Queen storylines, but it was just because of the drabness. It was just because of the boringness of the storytelling. Like, it was just not, I don't know what happened. All of a sudden, it went from being so special and so unique and just a cut above the rest to being kind of more in line with the rest, you know, more in line with the sort of thing that we would see from BBC, from ITV, and not from this prestigious Netflix series that has been the most expensive and most acclaimed series on the platform for years now. So when it comes to some of my favorites and least favorites storylines on the show, let's start off with my least favorite. Okay, let's get all the negatives out of the way and then we can perhaps end off on a more positive note. When it comes to my least favorite storylines, I hinted at it just a second ago, but let's talk about it right now. The William situation, the Prince William Willsmania, all of that. No, boo. I'm so sorry, but boo, guys. Okay, I could deal with the first episode being about Will being so shy. He's so shy. He doesn't like cameras. He doesn't like screaming girls. It's just too much for him. I could deal with that because I'm like, okay, his mother passed away literally, I don't know, like months ago or years ago, depending on the, you know, the timeline. And so I completely understand it's just too much. And I'm guessing in the early 2000s, he was a big deal. Like I said, I have vague memories, you know, of this time. And I've seen Princess Diaries too, and I remember he was on that slideshow and Mia was considering potential suitors. Okay, so like he was like a hot shot back then. He was considered very attractive, I know that much. And so I can imagine that, you know, people made a big deal out of him when he was out on the streets looking kind of cute, and like good for him, you know. And maybe it was too much for him because he was 17 and it was overwhelming, and you know, so that's fine. I can deal with that part of the story, like it's but then we get to the Kate and Will's situation, love story, Lifetime movie nonsense, and that's where you've lost me. That's where that's where, like, guys, for the first time in my The Crown watching life, I was fast forwarding scenes. I'm sorry. I was fast forwarding scenes. And you know what? My brother was watching this with me for the first time. He's never watched The Crown before. And he was giving me a proper side eye, like, this is the show that you're crazy about. And I said, Stephen, I promise, it's not usually like this. I promise you, it's usually so elite and I don't know what's going on. And why is it that you've only come during this time? Like, I was just trying to make excuses because it's not usually like this. It's not. But I just hated the whole thing. And for the first time, again, you know, since I've been watching this series, I also really disliked some of the performances. I'm so sorry to Meg Bellamy, but she annoyed the hell out of me. I just really did not like her portrayal of young Kate. I just thought it was, again, very Lifetime movie. It didn't have a lot of depth or complexity to the character. And I think my opinion is also influenced by the fact that we've learned a lot more about William and Kate. If you know, you know. We've learned a lot more about William and Kate over the years. So this little love story that they've concocted feels very Lifetime, feels very propaganda-y for the future king and queen consort. But in reality, it kind of contradicts the facts that we know nowadays that have come out about their relationship. It sugarcoated the entire thing. And as I mentioned before, because I have vague memories of, you know, this time, and also I happen to know someone who worked with Kate, okay, when she graduated uni, so I know that this is just not, it's not even close to being reality, and that bothered me more than it ever has before whilst watching this show. So we're dealing with a whole different game here where I can't be fooled, and like I think it was okay when I could be fooled. I think it was better when I could be fooled. And honestly, in light of that, I'm glad that it's ending on this period, because any further in and we would be in real trouble. I will say though, in terms of the performances, I think Ed McVeigh did a really good job portraying a young Prince William. He was far better cast than his brother counterpart, but we'll talk about that in a second. But yeah, I do think that his performance was really good. I don't think it was top notch like some of the other performances that we have gone out of this series that that have made careers, like Vanessa Kirby and Claire please see what I mean? Like, it's night and day. You know, they still have got some incredible performances from these actors in the last seasons, like Elizabeth Debicki as Princess Diana, but I'm afraid Edward Veigh does not really fall in line with that part of the Crown's legacy. He did a good job, but it was nothing incredible. But even putting aside the performances, I just really didn't like how this whole uni love story turned into a CW show all of a sudden. I think it might be the case that Peter Morgan really struggled with depicting uni life in a way that corresponds with the regality and the royalty that the Crown usually exudes, right? Because uni life is just the polar opposite of that. But I think if you wanted to highlight how polar opposite it is, then perhaps you would have had more regality, okay, more royalty, more, you know, pomp and circumstance on the other side to make that juxtaposition even more stark. But instead we had a lot of drabness going on with the Windsors, and then this like grimy, filthy early 2000s university setting for this love story to take place in, and it just did not feel anywhere near as elevated as previous seasons have. And the second storyline that I wasn't the biggest fan of was how they dealt with Prince Harry. This series does not like Prince Harry. This series was very anti-Harry, very pro-Will, which, you know, you can understand why, right? Because one of them is in the line of succession and the other is just the spare to the heir. So I can see the propagandering, especially in the final seasons, and I think that's also something that has contributed to me kind of being put off from the show overall, just a little bit. So when it comes to the casting of Prince Harry for part 2 of season 6, they have Luther Ford, who I'm sure is a brilliant actor. This is not a knock on his acting abilities, but he just did not give me Prince Harry. I'm so sorry, like, he just did not give me Prince Harry. He gave me Ginger Draco Malfoy. Like, he gave me someone who needs to be in the Slytherin, okay, in the Harry Potter universe, okay. He just wasn't giving me Prince Harry. I think the actor that they had for part 1 of season 6, Flynn Edwards as a younger Prince Harry, was perfect. If you could just get someone who was just slightly older and had his same energy, it would have been brilliant. But instead they went for Luther, who just seemed so like sinister. Again, Slytherin. It's giving sinister, it's giving evil, it's giving propaganda, and I didn't appreciate that. Now, it is true that Harry got up to some nonsense in the early 2000s, wearing that Nazi costume, taking drugs, apparently losing his virginity to prostitutes. He himself has talked about his misdeeds in his youth, and so it's not surprising that the series delved into all of that, right? I mean, it's juicy hot goss that we all remember in the papers, just like with Kate's infamous fashion show. So yeah, of course they're going to show it on the show. But my problem is that they didn't do anything to kind of delve deeper into the character. He wasn't giving the same treatment as, say, Princess Margaret, who once upon a time had a photo shoot with a dress that was so low cut that it looked like she was naked, you know, in front of the papers, right? Like, remember how they dealt with that storyline? And compare it to how they dealt with Harry, who was just this annoying, bratty little brother who got up to some crazy shenanigans from time to time that drove William insane. Like, that's literally all that they gave him to work with in this final part of this final season. And it's peak, because they've given so much airtime to his mother and his brother. You'd think that they would dedicate just a little bit more to exploring him as a character as well. But I get the sense that his treatment on the show has been influenced by recent events and his current relationship with his brother and the family, and also with the British public. And so I think, you know, vilifying him in this way was very much intentional, which is a shame, because like I said, I think the series previously was just a little bit more above it all. Now, speaking of recent events and Harry's book Spare, which delved into some of these misdeeds he got up to in his youth, There are definitely hints towards these things throughout the season, or this part of the season, when we take a look at the brothers' relationship and we see a lot of frostiness there. I do like how they kind of mirror the relationship between Elizabeth and her sister Margaret, with Elizabeth even telling William that it is tough to be number 2, constantly in number 1's shadow, and she pleads with him to, you know, understand where Harry is coming from. She is of course speaking from experience after dealing with Margaret almost all her life. So I did like that. You know, there were points throughout this part of the season where they were trying to draw on some of the overarching themes that have crossed all 6 seasons of the show, and I think that was one example of that being done very successfully, even if I would have liked to see Harry's side of things because it was mostly just Liz talking to William like, please, you know, be good to your younger brother, you know, you need to understand him. But she never actually had a conversation with him. She never actually had a conversation with her younger grandson. So like, I feel like that was missing from the show. Now, another storyline that I didn't care for when it came to part 2 of season 6 was Liz's fear of being replaced by Tony Blair. That just felt like a setup to the world's biggest joke, because we know what happened. We know how that ended. But also, why would you have an episode centered on that when we can't know for sure how she felt really about Tony Blair's popularity at the beginning of his prime ministership, premiership? That's it, premiership, right? We don't really know if she was terrified of him being anointed, okay, and made king of the country. We don't know any of that. We don't know if she woke up. This is something that my brother said. We don't know if she actually woke up in a cold sweat thinking about having to walk the streets as a civilian. That scene where she's literally just walking on the street and people are ignoring her, heading on over to the coronation of Tony Blair. Please do not make me laugh. Please do not make me guffaw. That was so ridiculous. Having that as a fear for a constitutional monarch, mind you, was a little bit sus to me. I don't know what Peter Morgan was thinking that day, but it just did not make her a sympathetic character. What do you mean you feel a rivalry against a democratically elected prime minister? What are you talking about? What are you saying? And then the episode ends with this dunk, mic drop moment where Tony Blair was talking to the Women's Institute of something, and he fumbled the bag. He literally, fumbled the whole occasion because he made the situation political and was diving into politics and all of that. Whereas the Queen had previously gone to speak to the Women's Institute, and then she was a huge hit because she understood their culture. She understood what they wanted from her. And so that's supposed to be a win on her part. But so what? Do you know what I mean? So what? Because she's not a prime minister. She's supposed to be a symbolic figurehead. She can't actually pass legislation. I don't know who you're competing with. Compete with one of the other queens from a European country, sis. Don't compete with a democratically elected leader, regardless of how problematic he ended up being. But let's not blur the lines. This is a constitutional monarchy, okay? And there's no reason for her to be waking up in a cold sweat thinking about Tony Blair getting coronated, because that's not what we're working with here. This isn't a dictatorship. But yeah, that whole storyline was really bizarre to me. I mean, of course, The Crown has done a brilliant job in the past of exploring Liz's relationships with her previous prime ministers. I still think to this day that the best one that they delved into was her relationship with Winston Churchill, who was her first prime minister. That was the best job that they did. But of course, in the early seasons of the show, they did a really, really great job of exploring that dynamic and those weekly meetings that they had. But as the seasons went on, they were kind of brushed over more and more, culminating in this very bizarre storyline of Liz's rivalry against Tony Blair, where she wakes up in a cold sweat thinking about how he could be coronated one day. That's just we lost the ball. We actually lost the plot a little bit on that one, I'm afraid, Peter Morgan. Oh, and of course, I just remembered, alongside Winston Churchill, I would say Margaret Thatcher. Margaret Thatcher was another prime minister that was very well explored, of course, in season 4, I think, of The Crown. But I mean, since then, we just have not gotten... Despite the fact that I think that Bertie Carville did a good job portraying Tony Blair, even if he was a little bit too intense with the teeth acting. Although, speaking of teeth acting, I would say that Lydia Leonard, who portrays Tony Blair's wife, Cherie, did a splendid job there, because she genuinely looked so much like her. Literally so much like her. It was uncanny. So I think the teeth acting was warranted there, because Cherie Blair was known for her rather full-on smile. So clearly there were elements of the final part of season 6 that I wasn't the biggest fan of, I'm afraid. But I will say, this is still The Crown. It's still one of the best shows that Netflix has ever made. Okay, period. And so, of course, it still gave me some moments of gold, some nuggets of gold and wisdom that I really loved. And the first thing would definitely be, hands down, the episode called The Ritz, which explored Liz's crazy night out on VE Day with Margaret when they were younger, where they went to central London to the Ritz, where they were partying with some black men. Okay. They went out partying with some African American soldiers, okay? I have thoughts on how this is portrayed, on how this is a common theme when it comes to, I guess, like white media in general, where it's like, if you really want to have a good time, if you really want to let your hair down, go to the Negro. They really know how to party, do you know what I mean? Like, they really with the jazz and the crazy dancing, like the jitterbug. So listen, if you want to go to some stuffy gala with like traditional music, people turning their noses up at you, then go to the white side of the party. Go to the white side of the party. But if you really want to get down, if you really want to have a good time, then go to the Negroes. Listen, I've always had a problem with this depiction because I feel like it's feeding into some potentially problematic stereotypes. So I did kind of side-eye some parts of this episode that I otherwise enjoyed, because it's definitely a stereotype that we have seen time and time again, right? As soon as you hear the music start to bop, as soon as you hear people start to go crazy, it's like, oh, this is where the black people are. Anyway, but I do still think that it was really endearing that Margaret held on to that memory of Liz finally letting her hair down at such a young age so dearly, even, you know, when she was much older. And I think that episode came together so brilliantly. It was very reminiscent of The Crown. You know, I keep saying it, but it's true. That episode in particular gave me The Crown vibes, right? The kind of thing that we would see in seasons 1 to 4 in particular. And I can't go on discussing this episode without mentioning the amazing Viola Preterjohn, who looks eerily crazily similar to Claire Foy. I thought they had CGI'd this girl. I thought she was a product of artificial intelligence, because she literally looks exactly like Claire Foy. It was crazy. There were some angles where she literally just looked like a CG Claire Foy, and it was so uncanny. It was so wild. I could have sworn they were related, and honestly they could still be related, but that was just like, the casting director really cooked with Viola. The casting director really cooked. I bet you on that day the casting director was like, did my job and my paycheck, because she literally looks so much like Claire Foy. It's insane. But aside from her uncanny appearance, I think she did a great job of melding together the super young Queen Elizabeth that we have seen in previous seasons, right, when she was like 10 to 15 years old, with the older, you know, early 20s Queen Liz that was portrayed by Claire Foy. She was like this really happy medium that made sense in the continuity, and she gave a really brilliant performance, especially as this version of Liz that did let her hair down, had a fun time, and for a second wasn't the future Queen of England. But then you have the other part of this episode which really struck me deep down. Honestly, it really affected me, and that was the part where Princess Margaret's health deteriorated. Now, as someone who has experienced something like this, similarly with, someone who was close to me. Seeing that play out on screen was really emotional and really, really touching. And I think they did such a brilliant job of showing how each and every time she thought she could get back up and start living her life and cheat on the doctor's orders just a little bit. Stay away from those cigarettes, Princess Margaret, okay? Unfortunately, something else hit her and she was just met with such bad luck, and it was so sad to see. And I'm so happy that this season remembered to give Princess Margaret her honorary episode, as she often has had in previous seasons. But it was so sad that this was the way that she ended up, being really, really sick, suffering these horrific strokes. It was really sad and shocking. This bright, beautiful woman who was controversial in a bunch of ways, okay, and very elitist, but she was the Queen's sister, and she had all of the tools and medical help and resources at her disposal. But at the end of the day, your health is your health. There's nothing you can do if it breaks down. And in this situation, she just suffered. She suffered near the end of her life. And that really touched me as someone who has seen that, closer to my own life as well, very recently. So I was really, really struck by the Ritz episode, and not just because it kind of harkened back to the early seasons of the show that I loved so much, but also because it really hit home for personal reasons as well. And so with that, I will have to tip my hat to Leslie Manville, who did such a brilliant job of portraying Princess Margaret in the final chapter of her life. She still had that ferocity, she still had that fierceness and that, willfulness to live the life the way that she wanted to, despite the fact that a bunch of rules and laws and policies had told her that she can't do this and you can't marry that and you can't have that. But in her older years, she had managed to find this kind of space to exist in that kept her relatively content, and to see that be taken away from her due to poor health was really, really heartbreaking, especially with the way that the events played out, with the strokes and her health continually deteriorating and burning her feet. And not to mention, this gave us a chance to return back to this core relationship within the Windsor family, between Liz and Margaret, where all of a sudden these, young women that we have seen across the seasons are now older sisters, older siblings, but they're still talking to each other the way they used to in their youth. And Liz is visibly terrified to see what is happening to her sister, and it's really emotionally affecting her. It's a huge contrast to the Liz that we saw in the first part of this season, where Princess Diana died and she seemed pretty cool, calm and collected. This time around, her feathers have been ruffled because it's someone that she was very close to, obviously her sister, and she's just terrified to see her go. But then another favorite would in fact be the final episode, where we get some Spider-Man No Way Home type of situations. Okay, listen. James Gunn, okay, sidetrack. James Gunn recently opened his mouth for some reason. Okay, much respect to James Gunn, but you didn't need to be talking about this. But James Gunn opened his mouth and was like, one of the things that's wrong with comic book movies is the, unnecessary cameos, blah, 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 boo. And let us have our fun with the cameos, okay? Yes, sometimes the cameos, can be poorly done and we don't need them and it can ruin it, blah, blah, blah. But let us have fun, guys. It seems like these days, side note again, it seems like these days, a lot of these directors just do not want us to have fun. They don't want us to have fun the way that we want to have fun. They just want us to have fun the way that they want us to have fun. And I'm sick of it. I'm tired of it, okay? They're always saying, don't do this, do that. No, you can't tell me what to do. You ain't paying for my cinema ticket anyway. But this final episode of The Crown did remind me of James Gunn's spiel, because it was very cameo heavy. We got that cameo from Olivia Colman where she's, talking to older Liz, portrayed by Imelda Staunton, who we'll talk about in a second. And, she's actually trying to convince her to step down, because one of the conflicts within Liz at this time is whether she should just abdicate, because she is getting older. She's approaching 80. 30, and you know, it seems like her son is in his prime at this point, and he's ready, or he seems ready to become king now. So while she's already approaching becoming one of the longest reigning monarchs, why not, you know, throw in the towel, call it quits, and just settle down into the life of Elizabeth Windsor once more in her final years. But I knew as soon as like Olivia Colman was talking, I was like, this doesn't sound, I wonder what Claire Foy would say. I knew that she would have something else to say. And she did. She showed up, and honestly, I rewound that scene so many times. I'm not afraid to admit it. I told you guys, I love this show, okay? It's actually the first 4 seasons of the show. So like when I saw Claire Foy, I got chills. Guys. Like, come on, are you serious? Please, I fell for it. I know that it was intentional. I know that they played me for a fool, but I fell for it, and what? And I got a smile on my face. So now what? But yeah, I knew that Claire Foy would show up and be like, no sis, I don't know who you heard that from. I don't know who told you that nonsense, okay? But don't listen to them, listen to me, because I'm the one who has clear memory of our uncle abdicating, okay? And how Queen Mary was adamant that I would stick it out until the day I die, and how I made that speech. I made a vow to the people that I would do so. So there's no way that you're abdicating. You're sitting right there on that throne, even if it is for another 10, 20, 25 years, and lo and behold, it was, right? So yeah, that was Claire Foy bringing her back to her senses. And honestly, I loved that. I loved that entire scene. Again, it was very Spider-Man No Way Home, but like, look at how I'm smiling. Let me have fun. And also, to be honest, the last episode needed this. It needed something to pick us back up, because a lot of it was very drab, very drowsy, and like, oh, I'm too old to be queen, I should step down, Charles wants to marry Camilla. Like, there just wasn't enough good news. So yeah, Charlie is fine and dandy, and he's king now, and you know, Camilla is queen. So they've had noticeably a more favourable depiction of the two in the final seasons of the show, which is whatever. Just end it, you know, close it out, flat screen, let's just get this over with. At least we got the cameos that gave me some sort of excitement for a little bit. But also, let's not forget, in the final episode of the show, not only did we get some great cameos from the previous queens, but we also said a final goodbye to Imelda Staunton's iteration of Queen Liz. And I would say this is the best that she's ever been, you know, in the last 2 seasons that she has been on the show. Again, largely because she was so overshadowed by the Princess Diana situation of it all. She didn't really have much to do apart from, you know, talk on phones and look at newspaper headlines with a disgruntled expression, and, you know, look outside of windows across manicured lawns. Like, that's literally what she had to do for the last 2 seasons. But, you know, for this final part of season 6, she actually had some acting to do, and like, good for her. Honestly, love that. Okay, we both went to the same secondary school, as I mentioned in my previous video, so I did want to see her succeed. And it is unfortunate that it took a while to get there, but I think in the final parts of season 6, I did start to warm up to Imelda's version of Queen Liz. So guys, with all of that being said, I'm going to be giving season 6, the final season of The Crown, a 7.5 out of 10. And since this is the final season of the show, I'm also going to give it an overall score of 8 out of 10. So that's it from me. Now that I told you guys my thoughts on The Crown season 6, it's time for you guys to let me know what you thought of the series down in the comments below. Please be sure to subscribe to catch new videos coming up, including a review of Wonka and the Genie Awards, and also maybe a review of Aquaman. We'll see how I feel. We'll see how I feel. But in the meantime, thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.